Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Kasla the Broken Halo. This is a Convoke deck, and one of our donation decks of the week that comes from Neth, who says, hey, looking for some tips on how to improve my Kasla the Broken Halo deck. I'm a new player and have upgraded the precon quite a lot, but unsure where to take it now. My idea was to deal commander damage to a single opponent while doing burn damage to others. It seems to be okay, but maybe a little slow, and board wipes really hurt me as I want to convoke spells onto the battlefield. Any help would be appreciated. And they say that my budget is about 10 to 15 per card, unless there's a card that will have a huge effect on the deck. Absolutely, Neth, we can work towards that. That budget is very large. I don't really think we need $10 or $15 a card, but Kasla has been one of those commanders, and I don't know why, but just lying on my table for a while, like my desk here, she's been on top of it because she's a commander that really catches my eye, and I think there's some really interesting stuff that she does. But before we get there, let's take a look at who she is, and then look at the deck proper. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Kasla the Broken Halo, and why are they our Convoke commander? Kasla is 6 mana, though that's deceptive. She is in blue, red, and white colors, that's Jeskai, an Angel Ally, 5/4 Flying Vigilance Haste. She has Convoke, as does most of the deck, and Convoke means that you can tap creatures in order to pay for the mana cost of the Convoke card, and creatures with colors can pay those colors into the card. And her main ability works with Convoke that says whenever you cast another spell that has Convoke, scry 2, then draw a card. One of the things that really catches me about Kasla is all of the different things she does and all the different directions she can go into. She feels a little bit like a, what would we say, a jack of all trades but master of none kind of thing. She has an incredibly aggressive stat line, and with vigilance and haste can attack really well, but isn't really a Voltron commander. She has a Convoke plan, but though scry 2 and draw is good, it's the spell preordain, it's not like damage oriented, it's more like you can use her as a card advantage engine or a card selection engine as opposed to a more aggressive plan. She is an angel and she's an ally, 2 creature types that have very specific kind of builds around them, though she doesn't really lend to either because there's no ally Convoke spells, and angels I don't think have a large amount of Convoke spells. Like, do you see what I mean? There's so many different threads about her, but they're all kind of cool. Kind of how Neth said, when I look at Kasla, I do see her as an incredibly aggressive commander that you just kind of send in a direction. When you think about it, you can kind of think that 6 mana and cut it down to, I think, reasonably 2 to 3 mana most of the time. As long as you are putting out creatures, and as long as you are putting out creatures of enough colors, you can constantly pay for her and have her out most of the time. But this is going to get to the main kind of situation of Convoke decks. So this Convoke precon came out in March of the Machines, where we got some more Convoke cards. And so there's a lot of people who are newer to Magic like Neth who have probably started here. And Convoke is a really cool mechanic, but it has some interesting caveats. The main caveat for a deck like Kasla is half of the Convoke we've received in the past is in green, because Convoke was generally the green-white Selesnya mechanic. So we have a bunch of Convoke that is just not able to be put into the deck. So that's a bit of a bummer. But the other thing about Convoke is so this would be what I would call a critical mass deck, right? Critical mass being that you want to get a certain number of things for the deck to function correctly. And for here, it's a number of creatures, token or otherwise, that can be used to tap for these Convoke spells. But what makes it kind of tricky is that it's not necessarily a critical mass deck, because you need all of those creatures in order to cast other spells that may not work with those creatures or work in the timing wise of those creatures. Something like, for example, Chant of Vitu-Ghazi is a very strong Convoke card, but is just kind of fog, right? It's just kind of a fancy fog. And we can't use this proactively. We have to use this reactively. So it doesn't really work with the plan of having tons of creatures and doing, you know, getting some really, really cool attacks through or anything. Like, it's literally dealt by creatures. If it was by creatures your opponents control, at least you could get a really cool block, then convoke them all. But you can't. It's just a fancy fog, which I think is, you know, it's just weird. It's just weird of the things we can do. We can tap all of our creatures for City on Fire, but for the majority of our creatures, that means they can't attack that turn, unless we can use certain abilities such as Jeskai Ascendancy to untap them all. Like, we are kind of going in multiple directions. Now, I don't think these directions are bad. I really do like this deck, and I like the directions that it's gone into. I will say the main thing I'm looking at, so we can start by doing a regular looking at our lands, is 38. I do very much so like that, and we can see our curve, and that's good. But I think Neth has already kind of caught on to the main Convoke problem, which is that as your creatures die, you don't really have a game plan. A board wipe is incredibly strong, and it's a lot of work to build back up, because it's not just that you're looking for having 1 or 2 more creatures, you're looking to get to 4 or 5 or 6 creatures so that we can, you know, fund our higher cost spells. Because something like Shivan Branchburner is a 7 mana 4/4 haste. For those who don't know, a 4/4 haste usually goes for about 4 or 5 mana. So we're paying 2 more for the chance to cast it for less than 4, right? 4 or 5, let's say. So with that in mind, I want to be a little bit, I want to apply some scrutiny to some cards that don't work with our game plan or don't offer much to our game plan. And a lot of it's going to be in the higher mana costs, right? Because there's a lot of these spells, speaking of Chant of Vitu-Ghazi, that we just don't have any means of casting should we not have our game plan in motion. The chant is just not going to do anything if we're just behind. And traditionally when we're behind is the time the spell is good. Like, outside of very specific scenarios where we were about to win and then one of our opponents like sets up a ridiculous attack that we can't stop otherwise, like, outside of that, there's not going to be a lot of situations where we're getting attacked by the strongest player and we have a bunch of creatures to spare. Like, if we're not in neutral or we're not that far behind. This is the kind of spell I want to get rid of. Spells that don't do anything and help our game plan, and even if they did, they could be cheaper. Like, why isn't this just Holy Day would be my first question. Let's find out how expensive Holy Day is. Don't look at this yet. We're not at editions yet. Holy Day, on the other hand, yeah, Holy Day, the 1 mana version of this spell, don't get me wrong, you don't get any life gain, but the 1 mana version of this spell is like 22 cents, right? And I love this art. So with that in mind, like 8 mana for the life gain that doesn't work with our deck idea, or doesn't directly help our deck idea, like that's such a swath of difference between these two cards, right? Looking at a few other cards like this, Shivan Branchburner is pretty close. This is a very subpar creature. I do like it has flying haste like our commander, but because of how our commander works and we're trying to use command damage, it's just not going to add up really well. 9 a turn to hit 40 versus 5 a turn to hit 21. It's very clear that the 4 coming from this creature isn't going to make a big difference, right? Something likewise, I think Safara is close. I do like her and what she does, and I think we could have a few more instant speed flyer or token generators that make flyers to make this a little more reliable. I do like that she gives our creatures indestructible if they have flying. Like, I like this here, but I'd like to go more into spirit tokens, like more cards like Spectral Procession, which we could very reasonably do for this card to be good. Otherwise, a few other cards. Let's keep looking. Siege Gang Commander feels like a lot of work for this kind of deck to generate 3 goblins, right? So this is 4 creatures for 5 mana, where we can easily make 3 creatures for 3 mana off of these 2 spells, which are decent spells. And then even beyond that, the sacrifice ability only works on goblins, which we have Hordling Outburst, and I think that's really it to generate Dragon Fodder, as well. Yeah, I don't see them as being particularly good, and I don't see, like, that's a huge mana sink as well for it to be good in the first place. So I think I would cut this as well. Siege Gang Commander is a very fun card, but I just don't see it in this kind of setup. If we want something like that, once again, don't look at this, I would use Goblin Bombardment, because it is similar to what the card does, but it affects any type of creature. It works really, really well as a solution to what if my board's being wiped, and still still just like has a lot of utility as kind of value plays, where you can trade like 1 or 2 tokens for like a commander or like a really powerful card, killing like Thalias, killing Dark Confidants, killing Esper Sentinels. You're going to be very happy with that. Looking around a bit more, something else that I want to touch on before I get to the X spells, actually, I should very briefly say, Banisher Priest feels just a little cute in comparison to what we have otherwise. Like, we're a deck that has access to Swords to Plowshares, right? I just don't think, like, we can put other really good cards in here, like we have Cut Short, we have Devouring Light, like we have a lot of really good removal. We could play more, we could play Lightning Bolt, we should play Lightning Bolt. So why are we playing a 3-mana creature that exiles a creature and then they'll get it back later, right? Banisher Priest is like the worst version of these kind of O-ring situations, because one, this text is 1 paragraph instead of 2. That's very specific to blink strategies. So you could, with the other version, which I believe is Fiend Hunter, you could play it, blink it, and permanently exile one of your opponent's creatures. You can't do this with Banisher Priest. And also, unlike other O-ring abilities, she's a creature and therefore is the easiest to kill. And the board wipe that kills Banisher Priest also will give your opponent back their creature, one of your opponents back their creature, which makes it very, very good for them and very, very bad for you. Coming here, we've got these 2 X spells I kind of want to talk about. I really don't like these kind of X spells in Commander in general, but especially here. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the ceiling of this card, and the ceiling of this card is Finale of Glory with Wand of the World Soul. You tap this, the next spell has Convoke, you cast the Finale for, let's say, like 10 or 12, all of a sudden you get 10 or 12 4/4 angels flying. The ceiling is really high, I get it, but the floor of this card is awful. No matter how much mana you put into this spell, you are paying too much. I guarantee it. It is, so 2 mana for 2 bodies, 3 mana for 3, I forgot to add in. So it's 4 mana for 2 bodies, 5 mana for 3 bodies, 6 mana for 4 bodies. That's still not good. Not until you get to not until you hit the 10 do I really care about this. If this had instant speed, for example, like Secure the Waste, I might be a bit easier on it. Secure the Waste, I think, is much better than the other 2, but I personally do not like it. If we were in green or we had a tutor to make sure that we get the... I wonder why these keep changing. I feel like every time I click a card... Let's see. Yeah, they bounce back and forth. That's gonna get me for a while. I know if we had more ways to tutor Wand of the World Soul and Finale into hand, I think it would be a lot better. But in the situation here, it just feels like this card is just going to rot in our hands half the time or be used, in a subpar manner. Likewise, Form the Posse has the same kind of text. I do appreciate that these creatures have a little more utility with their ability to tap, but we already have an ability for them to tap. It's called Convoke, right? Like, we don't need them to do anything else. The fact that they're 1/1s instead of 2/2s already makes this worse than the previous spell. I'm not very interested in either of these spells. I would probably cut them both. Anything else that kind of catches my mind before I go into additions? Not really. I think the rest of it is generally good and in the right directions. There's definitely some Convoke spells that I don't think are very much so worth the effort, as hard as that might, like as cruel as that might be. I think the only one I'm going to finish on is Austere Command. So here's what I think about this kind of spell, is that there's almost no scenario that this doesn't hurt you, right? And don't get me wrong, I recognize the need and I advocate for the use of board wipes even in aggro decks. Board wipes are good. But we are running a very specific kind of deck, right? Something that's really interesting is that these two, destroy all creatures 3 mana or less, or 4 mana or greater, allow us to kind of jump around certain hoops. You know, like, for example, our Convoke creatures are all 4 mana and greater, so if we don't pick that, we always keep our commander and we always keep our Convoke creatures. But the other half of our deck is tokens. So no matter which one of these two we pick, we're losing like a bunch of our creatures and a bunch of creatures that do important things. Because if we lose the tokens, we lose our ability to Convoke. And if we keep the tokens but lose the bigger creatures, we lose our like ability to burn or otherwise damage our opponents in meaningful ways, right? So both sides of this that hurt us. Second of all, both destroy all artifacts and destroy all enchantments is very, very hurtful for us. We have very, very good artifacts and enchantments. Skull Clamp is a artifact that your opponents have to deal with, otherwise they lose the game, right? Wand of the World Soul, see, they jumped away. Wand of the World Soul as well is incredibly powerful in a deck like this and represents so much mana saved. On enchantments, Impact Tremors and War Leader's Call just represent so much damage. City on Fire is insane, and Jeskai Ascendancy is just magnificent with how this deck works. The thing with Austere Command is we have to pick two. There is very, very rarely a situation that this isn't going to harm us just as much as our opponents. And I think what we could say is the best use of this is just to use these two modes, keep our artifacts, keep our enchantments, or just wait for the moment that we are in last place and have the most to gain by losing everything, right? And then we cast this. So with that in mind, why don't we just play Day of Judgment? Why don't we just play Wrath of God? Why don't we play a Wrath that is 4 mana as opposed to a Wrath that's 6 mana? Or use one of the 3 mana Wraths that have like weird kind of specific restrictions about them instead. Like, do you see what I mean? This is a card that's just like a mainstay of commander decks and a mainstay of pre-constructed decks. So I get why it's there, but I think almost specifically to how this deck works, this card is very, very bad for it. Okay, with that in mind, I want to go into my additions. And you may have seen these a few times, but Novice Inspector and Thraben Inspector are kind of where I want to start. I want to start by giving you a 1 mana creature that has value to the deck that doesn't go away even if it dies. Both of these cards I think are really good because their floor is their mana dorks, right? They tap for 1 white mana, but they both generate, you know, a clue token on ETB. And honestly, it's not bad. I think it's a very low floor maybe, but the ceiling isn't terrible either, and having a creature that early game you can just put out or after a board clear or anything and start rebuying your value while it stays around and convokes spells, like, I think that's really good. I think both of these cards are really, really decent in the format and do a lot, especially if you're playing around, let's say, the Initiative or Monarch, and we'll get back to the Initiative in a second. Moving forward, Resolute Reinforcements is the next low mana card I want to say. This is just raise the alarm attached to a creature, and I still think this is just great. Notice that we've gone from creatures that cost 1 that tap for 1 to creatures that cost 2 that tap for 2, right? And I think that's exactly where these 3 creatures want to be. They help you on your game plan. Your deck is mainly white anyway, so the convoke that they're all white creatures and they convoke for their mana cost is really, really good. And I think they're very decent, especially as a, you know, if you have mana left over when you're not using your instant spells, being able to flash this in is going to be very nice. Another card that's very, very core to a lot of these decks is Stony Brook Schoolmaster, This is much like the other Stony Brook card that's in the deck, where whenever it gets tapped, an effect happens, but here, the tap creates a token every time, which I think is very, very powerful in this deck. We don't have, is it Emma Tandris? Yeah, I think so. The green-white elf that every time she taps, she makes a soldier. We don't have that, so instead we have Stony Brook Schoolmaster. Very strong card. I really do like that that they're white, and the tokens they create are blue, giving you basically 2 colors for convoking, and in a pinch you can attack with them to basically create a 1/1 if one of your opponents is open. Another one that's token generation and more that I think is really interesting is Faramir. Now, 4 mana is kind of a lot. I'm thinking of Kira and Pia Nalar, and I think this is better because Faramir represents 2 things your deck wants to do. Either you will draw a card if your opponent doesn't attack you, which is a card advantage after that first draw, or else they make 3 1/1s, which is Convoke fodder. Both of these, I think, are rather good, and this is a card that you can use politics with very, very easily to find the opponent that is going to give you the thing that you want. Don't forget, like, if you want that card draw really badly, because there's a lot of situations where your opponent would rather just give you the 3 1/1s, you can pick an opponent without creatures. Odds are they won't be able to get a hasty creature out, right? Otherwise, find an opponent who definitely doesn't want to let you draw a card, and then will give you all the soldiers that you want. This is a really cool card. I think it would fit well here. Another Convoke card that I think, the first Convoke card, and maybe even the only Convoke card when I think about it, that I really want to add to this deck is Knight Errant of Eos. I think Knight Errant of Eos is definitely one of the stronger ones for sure. The ceiling on this card is very, very high, and the floor is a 4/4 for like probably less than 4. I do really like this. The one thing is if you do not have creatures to convoke it, I think they literally don't do anything. Yeah, unless you have a bunch of 0-drops, which you don't. So if you can't convoke 3 to 4 creatures when you use this, you probably won't get them a good amount of value out of it, but I think it's fairly reasonable in your deck to do so and to get good value out of it. After that, it's just a beater, and it's a pretty good beater as a 4/4. I think this is just a very decent creature. Another creature that really caught my eye, I got this looking at Drum Bellower and the Village Bellringer, I think it is. These are cards that untap your creatures, and White Plume Adventurer is very, very strong at doing that, in addition to being the card that enables initiative. If you don't play with initiative is kind of a big thing, and I will say that if you don't want to introduce this into the group, you have reasons not to. Like, it is a big thing that changes how the game plays, and if you are a stickler for classic Magic, you won't like this, but I really like it. I think it's really powerful and gives you a lot of interplay, and it works really well with the amount of tokens that you have. When you take the initiative, you create the Undercity, and every upkeep, if you have the initiative, or whenever you gain the initiative, you go through the Undercity. White Plume Adventurer, giving initiative to you is really strong, but all of the other things she does is also very, very strong. So you're going to be happy with this card regardless. The fact that it's still so cheap really speaks to how Battle for Baldur's Gate was a very strange set, but very, very strong card. Another card that benefits your deck quite a bit is Rumor Gatherer. And I think, like, when we just think of the idea that your deck just needs to create enough tokens, like 2 creatures a turn need to come out for you to draw. And then we start looking into here, and we can see cards like Raise the Alarm or the Flash creature that allows us to flash out creatures on your opponent's turn. Secure the Waste is another one. And another one, I don't know if it's in the list. If not, I will add it to the end. The ability to get those 2 creatures out and draw a card, and even with 1 creature just to scry 1, is really, really strong. I think this is one of those cards in a deck like this that is going to really pay for its weight, where it'll tap for 1 mana and then start producing card draw every turn cycle and get you ahead this way. Another card about Alliance that I thought of after that is Witty Roastmaster. I have kind of a hard time with Witty Roastmaster. I want this card to be good, but I find at 3 mana, it's really expensive. However, we are playing Impact Tremors, the 3-mana Boros Impact Tremors. Playing this on top of those is a pretty good plan, I would say. Just going from that second point of damage, like if you already have Impact Tremors and you play this, and now whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you do 2 damage to each of your opponents. I think that's rather good, and it almost makes me think twice about cutting the 2 X cards, because they are really, really strong with these cards out. But still, I don't feel that bad, I will say. I will also be introducing a different X card, so maybe I'm a hypocrite. Another card here that really catches my eye that works in this kind of shell is Whirlwind of Thought. This works really well as a kind of pseudo backup for your commander. It only works on non-creature spells, but you have enough that I think it's good enough that you can just chain a few Convoke cards that aren't creatures and draw 2 to 3 cards. And if your commander is out, then you're scrying 2, drawing 1, and then drawing 1 off of this each time. Scry 2, draw 2 is really, really powerful and will enable you to get very far ahead over just 1 or 2 spells. I would say even 3 spells. Minimum 2 to 3 spells would be enough to get that advantage. Now I want to talk a little bit about stopping the board clears. We definitely have kind of a large amount of options to do so, especially in white, to protect your board from your opponent's board wipes. Not all of them. Exile-based wipes are still hard to kind of deal with, but the majority of them you can stop. And Selfless Spirit is one of the first cards for it. It's a few bucks, but a card that I really like because 1, it attacks really well, 2, it's a creature so it convokes, and 3, this ability is just very, very powerful because it has a lot of soft power because it stops board clears while it's out, because your opponents have to figure out a way to deal with the spirit first. But because of that, it also will eat removal that could be targeted at something else. So Selfless Spirit, very, very good. The other one that's very strong is Invasion of Gobakon. You do have to flip it, but with your commander and a few other flying creatures, you're going to have a really easy time. On flip, not only does it do something for all of your small tokens that you can attack with, it also just permanently has a stronger version of the Selfless Spirit text, where it says down here, creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible. That's so much better. It's a very, very good card. I'm surprised it's not more. I could see this being like a $10 card, but this was probably a very big. A lot of people open this set, but it's very, very strong. Any deck that is in white wants that kind of Selfless Spirit effect, but also attach it to a win condition by getting those +1/+1 counters. You'll be very, very happy with this. I actually think I need a second copy for one of my newer decks. I played this recently on MTG Mutz's channel, where I used this with Brina, and this card allowed me to basically get so far ahead, and I won the game, not just off this card, but this made a huge difference. And I think it's very much so worth considering to any deck that you want protection from board clears. Going to 2 weaker and cheaper cards, Unbreakable Formation is strong and proactive. Both of this card and the next card both have the element that you can use them proactively instead of reactively. Unbreakable Formation is either stop a board clear or preemptively get a very strong, maybe lethal attack through, right? And it also gives Vigilance, which I think is very good for this deck, by using the addendum, casting it on your main phase. All your creatures get Vigilance, you attack with them, and then you still have them untapped for Convoke. On the flip side, your Temple is under attack, is either the protection or card draw. Now, it is a card draw for you and an opponent. There's been a lot talks about these kind of effects. I know the MTG Goldfish crew talks about these kind of effects a lot. I'm not going to go through the whole discussion. Just trust me when I say this is a very good ability. Even if you subtract all politics from it, being able to draw 2 cards in exchange for your opponent to draw 2 cards, basically stapled on a very good card, you're going to be very, very happy with this. Either you either use this when you're going to lose, or you use this when you're setting up to win. And in both situations, you don't particularly care about the cards being drawn. I saved the best for last, and that's Grand Crescendo. Grand Crescendo is the costliest of this effect, and that's because what it's stapled to is way, way better than the rest. This is the secret X card that I think I would play. Whereas, 1, its instant speed, as mentioned before, is very, very powerful. 2, it does create green and white creatures. That green doesn't really matter here, but it is nice. I don't know what it is, if you need green mana, I guess. But then giving creatures you control gain indestructible, not tied to X in any way, is fantastic. This is 2 mana, your creatures get indestructible, or dump as much mana as you want to get those creatures and then gain indestructible. It's so, so good. And if you're looking for a card that's, leaning towards $7 to $10, this would be the one I'd pick up. Going near the end, I have this, and I gotta type out the last two, but Felwar Stone is just seemingly missing from the deck. You have Arcane Signet. I wouldn't mind Felwar Stone as well. This is likely to tap for about 2 of your colors most of the time, and in a deck that has 3 colors, it does help to have a little more mana fixing if you can. After that, I alluded to this earlier. Midnight Haunting is an interesting not a convoke spell, but a token spell that can work really well in a deck like this. It gives you more flyers, which works with Sephara. It works well with your commander, and its instant speed allows you to play other spells or hold it up and hold up, counter magic, protection, whatever you want. And I really do like that. I think that's really powerful. And though otherwise it does feel like a clunky card at times. Wait, is it in here? No, that's Phyrexial would be one. I was like, hold on, is it already is in the precon and you took it out? No, it's not. I just think this is interesting. I just think it's neat. And I'm very nostalgic for this card as well, so I do know that. But I think it would help. And because I can't get around saying it, play Lightning Bolt. Play Lightning Bolt. Please goodness, play Lightning Bolt. It is so, so powerful. It is under $1 most of the time, unless you want one of these very, very beautiful arts. There's so many. I think this one's one of my favorites, but I am honestly very much so a sucker for the classics, as most of my lightning bolts are M10 lightning bolts. I love the art. I love the flavor mostly, though I think it's a little confusing at times. Regardless, great card. Play it. Bolt your opponent's commanders. Bolt their creatures. You will have a great time, and occasionally you will bolt them in the face. This version of the card is oversized with a non-standard... I picked the... Whoa! I did not expect that. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this was helpful to you. When you start with a precon and you start building upon it, there's a lot of directions the decks could go into, because mainly a lot of these decks back at the time were always, and I think even now, the precons were built to be able to go in like 3 or 4 directions. And so sometimes picking a direction and trying to go in it kind of gets, you gain some and you lose some. And as we cycle the cards out, we kind of narrow it into the deck we want to be. I think this deck is in a very good situation. I think you've done very well. Saint Traft and Rem Carlos, which I believe is the secondary commander for this deck, is also very, very interesting, especially because it has a bit of a flying sub-theme to it as well. But as it is, I love Kasla. I love where this is going, and I'm excited to see more. And if you do make another draft of this card, I will, or this deck, I would be very excited to see that. All right, good luck. Happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.